Hello and welcome to this video on the Vijnana Bhairava tantra. Today we will see two verses presenting the philosophy of tantricism. They have specially inspired the philosophy called pratyabhidya, a philosophical system which is arguably the most sophisticated philosophical system that has emerged within the tantric movements. Because in tantricism there is always some kind of philosophy or background to the practices, and the practices are that philosophy put into action, but only in pratyabhidya or recognition it has arrived at a fully matured self-expression. So there are different sources of inspiration of that philosophy, and one of them is the verse that we're going to see now, the verse 109, that I read first, as usual, in Sanskrit. 109. Sarvajñaḥ sarvakartā vyāpakaḥ parameśvaraḥ evāhaṃ śaivadharmā iti dārḍhyāc bhavet. If one becomes firm in the conviction that I am that very one who is omniscient, omnipotent, or all-knowing and all-doing, all-pervading or all-pervasive, Supreme Lord, that one I am, śaivadharmā, because I have his powers, because I have those very same divine powers. If I become firm in that conviction, in that insight, in that realization, then one, he or she will become Shiva, that is God. So here the idea is quite simple. God is defined by a number of attributes or powers, and three of them, or four, are here named: all-knowing, all-doing, and vyāpakaḥ, all-pervasive. We're going to see what that means. Then I have those very same powers. I am all-knowing, all-doing, all-pervasive. Therefore, I am God. So the reasoning is very simple. God is the being who has this and that power. I do have this and that power. Therefore, I am God. And when this becomes a conviction, certitude, when I am certain of that, then I am God. I have become, as it were, God. That is, I have taken away the veil of mistaken beliefs, of mistaken opinions that had me say I am not God. So of course in that reasoning, because this is a reasoning and it is explained, taught as such in the pratyabhijñā philosophy, the idea is to make a connection between two things usually not connected, and that connection is called recognition, recognizing. That is, making a connection between what is very good, God, but which is very far away, which is deemed very, very far away, transcendent, para, very remote from me, from my being, and on the other hand, consciousness, which is very intimate, which is nearest, but which is usually deemed to be very ordinary, nothing special about it, with no special powers. So the demonstration of the recognition philosophy, the pratyabhijñā philosophy, is to show that consciousness is all-knowing, all-doing, and all-pervasive. In fact, all-pervasive here means that vyāpakaḥ, consciousness, is the necessary condition for anything to be, even if that thing is only unreal, only imagination, exists only for me and for no one else, only in my mind, or whether it is real, common, universal, has any objective reality to it. All that has at its necessary condition consciousness. That is, without consciousness, outside of consciousness, you could say, none of that is possible in any way, whether just to have a mere conception of it, or not to speak of the direct experience, the direct perception of it. For example, that vase exists only in the perception I have of it. If that vase, I'm going away, that vase still exists in my imagination, in my memory. If I have never seen it, it exists in my conception, my general concept of what is a vase. If I don't know that it is a vase, it exists as the general idea of a thing, of something that exists, that is. And all those actions are actions of consciousness, are aspects of consciousness, are activities or operations of consciousness. So all that is consciousness. Nothing, the vase outside, or my idea of the vase inside, or my illusions about the vase, my fantasies about the vase, none of that has any independent existence. To exist is to be an object for consciousness. And when everyone has gone outside of the place where that vase is, no one is no more perceiving it, remembering it, imagining it, then it still exists in consciousness as pure consciousness, undifferentiated. That is, to perceive that vase means that I perceive myself, but no more as myself. I perceive then, in that moment of perception, I perceive myself because there is nothing outside of myself, outside of consciousness, but I perceive myself as that vase which exists outside of me, that is outside of my body, which exists independently of my body, etc., etc. All experience is self-experience. All consciousness is self-consciousness. There is nothing outside of that. There can be nothing outside of that. Just try to imagine, to conceive a reality separate from consciousness. This will be just another form of consciousness, because it will be conception, it will be imagination, it will be a guess, it will be... Anyway, all those activities are activities of consciousness. So consciousness is vyāpakaḥ, sarvavyāpakaḥ. It is vyāpakaḥ in the logical sense. It is the necessary condition of all. Nothing can exist in this or that way without consciousness. It is all nothing but consciousness. Even the mere idea of a reality outside consciousness, unknown, I don't know what it is, I just know that it is. Well, it is still a form of knowing, and knowing is consciousness, is an activity of consciousness. So all is consciousness, and therefore I am all-knowing. Because everything known is known by consciousness. And it is then very simple and easy to see that all actions are also forms of consciousness, because action is just a series of knowings, like a series of pictures in a movie. And arising in a very arising very fast, it produces the impression of a continuous movement, but really this is just a series of flashes of knowing in a very fast pace. Therefore, it is also a form of knowing. So everything, all actions of this world can be reduced to a form of knowing. Knowing is reduced to consciousness, and all depends necessarily on consciousness. So there is the fact that I am consciousness, and consciousness is all-doing, all-knowing, all-pervading, the unique, necessary being of all without any exception. So, therefore, I am the Lord of everything, because to be the Lord means to be free and to be that on which everything else depends, like the subjects depend on the goodwill of their king to get their food, their protection, etc. So I am parameśvaraḥ. Parameśvaraḥ sa evāhaṃ, the Supreme Lord, that one verily, that one exactly, I am. So I hope this is clear for you. And of course, this is all developed much more in details in the pratyabhijñā, in the recognition philosophy. So if you want to know more about the arguments, the demonstrations, and the details of them, which are very, very, very detailed, you can go to see there. But the commentary here given by Shiva is not very, very detailed. It's just hardly 2 lines. Just 2 lines. What is interesting is that he connects that approach with the method of Shakti, Yam Shakti Bhuhu. So this is because you know that all the means in Kashmir Shaivism, in that tradition, are categorized under 3 headings. the way of Shiva, or the mean of Shiva, the mean which is Shiva, using Shiva as the mean, using God as the mean, using Shakti as the mean, the God's powers, or using the individual and his powers, his individual powers as the mean. Here it belongs to using the powers of God as the mean. Yes, because consciousness is the main power of God, is the power, the one power that encompasses all other powers, such as will, knowledge, action, etc. So to understand, to realize, to recognize divinity in consciousness is to recognize God's powers, to recognize godly powers, divine powers in one's own powers. And this is using powers, Shakti, as the mean for divine union, which is the goal of Tantric Yoga, divine union. This is the meaning of yoga, the union of me with the divine. And it shows, by the way, that the Shaktopaya, using powers as the mean, is in fact philosophy. It is working on one's concept and one's thought, one's representations, vikalpa sanskara, but in an abstract way, whereas all the other means below it, the so-called individual means, are working with concepts, but in symbolic or imaginative form, like in rituals, like in yoga. This is all working on concepts, vikalpa sanskara, refining, perfecting, educating concepts. And the next one, 110, is in the same spirit. jalasyevormayo vahner jvālābhaṅgyaḥ prabhā raveḥ mamaiva bhairavasyaitā viśvabhaṅgyaḥ vibheditāḥ. So in fact this is the same philosophy as in the previous verse, but presented by way of illustrations or comparisons, if you prefer. So here I think we find three of those comparisons. Like Eva, like waves of water or out of water, like flames out of fire, like the rays or like the light of the sun. Those waves of everything, viśvabhaṅgyaḥ, those waves of everything have a reason, vibheditāḥ, are differentiated, are multiplied, mamaiva, right from me, bhairavasya, right from me, who is therefore divine, mamaiva bhairavasya, they vibheditāḥ, they are differentiated right from me, who is, you can add this is implied, therefore divine. So there you have the same reasoning. I have the power of God, therefore I am God, but shown, pointed at through different drishtanta, different illustration, different examples, which are also, you would say in English, analogies. That is, there is the same relationship between the terms of those illustrations that between me and everything. Everything comes from me, just like waves come from the sea, are from the sea, just like flames are forms of fire or are aspects of fire, just like light is an aspect, a manifestation of the sun. So everything, the whole world, outside and inside, real, unreal, whatever, concrete, abstract, everything is a manifestation of me, consciousness. Not me, the body, not me, a limited individual, but me, universal consciousness. Therefore, universal consciousness, me, is God. And what the philosophy of recognition would add is that I, as an individual, I am God, but manifested in a self-contracted form. That is, I have everything of God, even as an individual. I have all the powers. Free will is a contracted form of the unlimited freedom of consciousness. I have all the powers of God, but in a contracted form. It's all there, just like when I have my hand open and my hand closed, is the same hand. Just it expands less, it contracts, it spreads less in space. But all the features of the hand are still there. But its powers are not the same. But all the features, all the details are there. So all the powers, all the divine powers are present in the individual, but in a contracted form. And how that contraction comes about is through freedom, free will, because consciousness has as its chief characteristic freedom. It does not depend on anything else. It can do what it wants. And we have an example of that. It's not so crazy as it looks. We have a very good example of that is in game. We can play. We play freely that we assume that we are not what we are. And that is very simple. And we have another example along the same line. It is art. And art is a very good example of that that has been explored by Kashmiri Shaivism in very great depths. Most of Kashmiri Shaiva masters were artists, poets, or at least literary critics. All of them were deeply touched by art, and especially the supreme form of art, which is at once poetry and theater, comprising music, dance, poetry, and all forms of literature. And that is because art, which is a form of game, is an example of activity where you can assume things that you're not, pretending to be someone you're not freely. It's not under constraint, it's not by force. It's just out of freedom that you can limit yourself. You can say you're a thief for the sake of the story, for the sake of savoring the emotions of those fictions, of those games. And this is what children are doing. So this is very common. This is what consciousness does spontaneously, freely. Consciousness is play. Consciousness has an innate, inborn sense of game, sense of pretending. And this is the root of self-identification and therefore of self-limitation and self-contraction. So all the play of duality, of multiplicity, of separations and conflicts and love and hate and all that is the manifestation of the infinite powers of consciousness. That's the logical explanation based on direct experience given by the tantric philosophy of recognition. And you see, all that is not based on the hope that we can reach some special modified state of consciousness. No, it's based on ordinary, universal, common consciousness. It is just a special and extraordinary examination of so-called ordinary consciousness. So this is open to everyone, provided one has the taste for it and the motivation for it. If one is lazy and stupid, well, it is consciousness that wants to play stupid. And then there is, according to the pratyabhijna, to the recognition philosophy, there is not much to do. So that's all for today. Thank you for listening, and see you next time.